What if the mountain learned your name, and every time the wind slid to the pines, it whispered it back to you, closer each night, until the syllables press against your ear like a cold mouth you could not see? Welcome back to my channel, Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I have something truly haunting for you. We are going up into the Appalachian spine, where the towns are small, the hollers run deep, and the dark keeps its own clock. From footsteps that circle your house when the roads are washed out, to voices that sound like your own calling from the Treeline. Every story tonight is a trail you should not follow alone. From eerie voices in the woods to people who vanish without explanation, each of these tales is a mystery waiting to unfold. Some of them will seem impossible. Some will feel uncomfortably familiar. All of them will leave you checking your windows twice before you sleep. Before we begin, tell me in the comments which story creeped you out the most and why you think the mountains keep their secrets so well. Story 1. Where the wind knows your name at 2:11 in the morning. The wind slid down Harker Ridge and said my name to the porch screens, but it said it like a stranger learning the word for the first time. The sound curled through cedar smoke and the metallic tang of our well water and found my ear above the rubber hiss of my father's oxygen machine. It spoke again, closer, practicing, as if a mouth I cannot see press against the mesh. In the kitchen, the sink drip ticked a slow clock. A whip pour will call 2 notes from the Treeline. The voice asked if I could still hear my father breathing, and I could, for now. I was Lena Crow, 29, home again in the old clapboard house with the tin roof and the big rock that held the back door shut when the wind came hard. My father would not leave the ridge. His lungs had gone bad underground, and I had promised to keep him stable through the winter. I worked as a home health aide at night and measured his oxygen by day. If I save enough, we could move down where roads did not ice in a single cold hour. He said the ridge had raised us. He said a person should die where the trees knew his name. I have always done things alone. The habit feels like strength until it starts sounding like a dare. The neighbors try to help when I first came back, but gossip on a mountain is like burrs. It sticks. My ex spread stories, the kind that travel in church halls faster than flu. So I kept my head down. I kept the generator full and the tanks ordered, and I trusted the small systems we could maintain with our own hands. When the wind tried my name, my first instinct was to pretend I had misheard it. I did not look at the porch. The church bell in town had been stuck at 2:11 since a lightning strike in the spring. Folks said it was a sign or a joke, depending on whether they feared October more than they feared payday. I had measured our generator fuel by that frozen time, enough to make it to Friday night, if the cold stayed sharp. A storm was due in after 11 on Friday. The county radio warned us about water in the low places and wind in the high. I could feel the pressure change when it passed the porch screen and whispered again, eager as a child who teaches wind to speak. At dawn, I found footprints circling the house. The snow had crusted overnight, and the prints were clear like stamps. The tread matched my boots, right down to the worn patch on the heel. The stride length matched too, and that sent a cold through me that had nothing to do with frost. Each loop came close to the porch. Not one print crossed the boards. Each trail vanished clean at the Treeline. The way a story vanishes when the person telling it decides you do not deserve the ending. I knew how it sounded, and still I went around again, looking for a second set that might make sense. There was only mine and not mine. When the wind tried again that evening, it got my name exactly right. The problem was the tone. It sounded like my father calling from the creek in the summer of 2004. The exact weight he put on the second syllable when I would not come in. I stood by the back door and pressed my palm to the red paint where the knob used to be before we replaced it with a latch. A knot of red thread had been tied around the latch. I could not remember tying it. The thread smelled like cedar and something colder, almost iron, in the toolbox. I found a torn map my father kept from the number 7 ventilation works. The lines looked like veins. The old shafts ran under more of the ridge than people admitted. The church bell did something it had no right to do. It tolled once, soft as if it were underwater, and the rope in the tower window hung still. I counted heartbeats, 10 beats after the 2 notes in the trees. The bell sighed as if a breath had gone through it. My father shifted in his sleep. The oxygen machine hissed and hummed. The cedar smell deepened. I wrote down the time on a pad I kept by the sink. I did not like how the numbers looked, as if the pen had remembered how to shape them long before I chose them. I recorded the whisper. It was an old handheld with a cracked casing from when I thought I would make a podcast about the mountain stories. Into the dark, I said nothing. I let the wind do its practice. I was trying to prove to myself that it would not be on the tape, the way certain things refuse proof. When I played it back, my name sounded in my voice, not just similar. It had the small hitch I have when I say my full name on a bad phone connection. The second playback layered my father's 20-year-old tone beneath mine, like a duet learned without permission. I shut the handheld off and kept it in my pocket. Where was the lesson in a voice that could record you before you spoke? The number 7 map showed a lattice that ran under Harker Ridge. A spider of tunnels, drifts, and dead ends bled through with notations. My father had marked ventilation lines with tiny arrows that all pointed toward a chamber by the creek bend. I walked the fence line at noon and marked where the whisper had sounded strongest. Fresh boot prints kept appearing next to mine, heeled a toe inside my stride, as if something walked there only when I did. That afternoon, the 2-note call came from my right, and 10 heartbeats later the kitchen sink drip slowed as if the house itself held breath. I started to time the cycle the way you time contractions, not because I was expecting anything human to arrive, but because the body recognizes a pattern and cannot let it go. We lost cell service in every storm, but the ham radio still worked if I fed it. On Thursday night, I made a choice I am not proud of. I unplugged the oxygen concentrator, counted down from 60, and rigged the ham to the generator for a quick transmission. I gave my call sign and my full name 3 times, the way Dad taught me when I was a teenager with no friends, only frequencies. The generator coughed on the 3rd call. In the bedroom, my father's chest stuttered and paused. I ran back and plugged the concentrator in. The rubber smell of the hose turned to that iron cedar edge like the air at the mouth of a cellar. From outside the porch screen, something repeated my full name like it had been taught better. You can say I earned what came next. I heard my voice again, cleaned up, no hitch, exactly how it should sound on a clear night with the antenna high. Then 10 heartbeats after the 2 notes. The church bell rang once without motion. The edge of the sound came through the floorboards as if the house were connected to the tower by bone. I went to the porch and watched the road. No one was there. The trees stood in their rows like old men waiting for a prayer to finish. I thought about how many times I'd lined up letter by letter to spell myself into a radio, and how letters do not care which throat they travel through if the air pulls right. The next day, Eli Booker came by. Eli lived a half-mile down at a trailer that leaned into a stand of poplar trees. He did not come to my door much, not since the winter we dated for a month, and realized we could not stand each other in the same room, and wanted anyway. He looked spooked. He said someone had come to his place at 2:11 all week and knocked 3 times. He thought it was me because he had seen me standing in the logging road the night before. I had not left the house. Eli was swearing more than he usually did. He said he felt dumb for asking, but he needed me to say I had not been there, because the person in the road had my walk and my jacket and the way my right hand goes fist when the wind cuts. We went up to number 7 at dusk. The adit was halfway collapsed on the high side, a black grin in the hill with the red thread of surveyor's line sagging across it like a tongue. I smelled cedar under the wet rock, the air pulsing the hole, not steady, coming in 2 quick breaths and a longer draw. When the pulses were strong, the trees around us shifted their leaves without a breeze. I lifted my handheld recorder. Eli rolled his eyes, and then a voice from inside the tunnel repeated my call sign with my full name and my father's birth name, which only his brothers used, a name I had not heard spoken since Grandma's funeral. I tasted well water in the air. The draft was breathing through our pipes. That night the storm came early. The road washed at the low turn. The cell service dropped, and the landline did too, as if the town had decided we did not need each other. The generator flickered its last bar. Eli tried to start his truck, and the engine turned once and quit. I heard the church bell, faint like a spoon tapped against a jar somewhere under the house. In the vents, my name came in my father's old-tone, patient kind. I had promised him I would not go into the works. He made me promise after a boy fell through a rotten cap and was hurt bad. I heard my promise in my head, and then I broke it. I want to tell you, I had another choice. Maybe I did. The voice had moved inside the house. The oxygen machines has began to answer the 2-note rhythm, like it was learning a song without meaning to. The red thread on the back latch wound tighter by itself when the pulses came strong, as if a small hand were practicing knots. My earlier broadcast had given the wind perfect pronunciation. The immediate price was mimicry that could pass for me. The delayed echo was a breath pattern in the machine that matched the flexing grill in the tunnel. It is a strange thing to recognize your future in a piece of plastic. But I did. I went back to the map and laid it over the ridge like a skin. The places I had heard my name lined up with old horn and ventilation routes. I stood by the porch and counted. At 10 heartbeats after the 2 notes, the draft pressed every window screen against his frame as if testing for a seam. The bell tolled once and stopped like a hiccup. The partial answers were pieces of a larger thing that sat just out of sight. If you have ever stared at a thicket long enough to imagine a deer, then watched the deer make the thicket true, you know the feeling. Something was riding the air itself. Eli found the plastic sheath of a cheap Bluetooth speaker by the skirting boards on the porch. He held it up like a verdict. He told me he had stolen gas from us early in the month when his car declined, and he felt guilty, and maybe we were being pranked by a kid. He said the generator had sputtered because he had watered the last can. He pointed at streaks by the boards and called them shoe scuffs. He said he had smelled battery acid under the steps. The story fit neatly in his hands, and I wanted to hold it too. I wanted to set it on a shelf and dust it twice a year. The scuffs were not rubber. They were wax from old red twine. I knew the feel because my father kept knots of it in the toolbox for marking safe air. The battery acid smell was not plastic at all. It was the oxidized iron breath from the number 7 collapse. The scent that rolled out of the tunnel like a weather report in a language the trees understood. When the generator died the next hour and the house went quiet, the voice did not stop. It bent around corners and came through the vents and arrived with a pulse even as the last power drained out of our walls. The speaker story broke in my hands. I did not blame Eli for offering it. We all like masks better than faces. My father slept, and his mouth worked around my name without sound. The storm peak was 10 minutes off. I strapped my headlamp on and tied the red thread from the latch around my wrist. I told Eli to keep watch and count heartbeats. I told him to plug the oxygen into the battery pack if the generator failed. He told me to wait for the county crew in the morning. The road would be passable by noon. The rational thing was to make tea and be afraid inside. The thing I did was this. I left my father for exactly 10 minutes by my watch. If you're going to judge me, do it now, before the rest of what I say shifts how you feel. The tunnel took the light, like a throat takes a whisper. The floor slicked with water from the storm, and the rails under my boots hummed tiny, as if they remembered a train. 10 heartbeats after the 2 notes. The rusted grill flexed and exhaled, and the red thread on my wrist tugged toward the metal like a dog that smells its old yard. The voice used my father's breath count. Then it used the cadence I had learned on the radio as a girl. The pride in the call sign, as if the air were a river and my name was a leaf circulating back to where I dropped it. I knew what I had done. I knew when I did it. I had taught the ridge. Years ago, I had sat on the porch with a coat over my legs and practiced my full name into a cheap microphone, while the antenna my father rigged pointed at hollow under number 7. The old PA horns, corroded and forgotten, had been connected to a ventilation line that breathed on a cycle when the temperature dropped at 211. The bell in town was nothing but metronome tied to that draw through a draft line no one maintained after the Union disbanded. My father had drawn those lines on the map, not because he wanted to remember the mine, but because forgetting where the air went is a good way to die. I had given the air something to carry. I tied the red thread across the grill in the minor pattern he taught me, the way they marked safe sections when dust hung hot. My hands shook, but the knot remembered how to make itself. I waited for the 2-note flex and counted 10 heartbeats. Then I pulled the bell rope from inside the chamber to make it toll wrong. 212, a small edit, but edits can break habits. The bell rang late and echoing, as if surprised by its own delay. Behind me in the tunnel, I felt the pull reverse for one breath. The voice faltered and dropped a syllable like a pebble into a well. The vents at the house went quiet for a span that felt as long as a Sunday. I turned to leave, and my headlamp caught water trembling on the thread. That is when someone spoke in my exact voice from the other side of the grill and asked if I could still hear my father breathing. The copy had taken on worry, and I learned something hard about myself in that echo. Worry makes me soft at the edges. If you were listening then, I am sorry for the silence. I did not answer. I did not know whether my silence taught it anything useful. I stepped back into the tunnel, and the air pressed against me like a whole town leaning on a door. I made it home with 1 minute left on my watch. Eli sat by the bed with his hands on his knees, and the battery pack blinked its half-hearted light. My father was alive, but the oxygen hiss had changed. It hit the 2-note rhythm, and then held for a count the way the grill held before it flexed. He opened his mouth and formed my name without air. He smiled a little like I had come in from the creek at last. The generator died for good, and I heard the house relax in the storm as if it could finally sleep. I waited for the bell that did not ring, and then at noon the next day it tolled once. The scent of cedar and iron filled the kitchen, as if someone had opened a cellar door under the sink. On 3 mornings after, I found footprints circling the house again. They were mine, perfect as if cast from a mold, but each loop stretched a hair longer than my stride. If you want to know whether it felt like someone learned to walk like me, I can tell you, it did. On the second morning, I woke with a red thread not tied around my wrist in the minor pattern. I could not remember tying it. The knot was snug, not cruel. The porch screen had a small, new dent that fit the pressure of a mouth against mesh. I retied the thread across the back latch every night. I checked the toolbox map until the paper started to wear soft where my finger traced the lines. The bell in town fixed itself the next week, or rather the town fixed it. They replaced the rope and set the hour right. It still tolled once on certain days at noon, and every time it did, the kitchen filled with the cold cedar scent like a patient breath. I kept my father on battery backup, And ration is ours the way we ration our dinners in hard months. The voice in the vents did not speak for a while, which was a different kind of fear. Silence after an answer is the longest room. The county crew came and graded the road, and Eli refilled our gas cans and apologized a month he watered ours. I forgave him in words and tried to mean it in my chest. He stopped bringing up the speaker. We do not mention the days when the drafts align. There's a place between us where that story sits, and we walk around it like a sleeping dog. I listen at night for the two notes, and when they come, I count my heartbeats and take care not to say my name aloud. Maybe that is superstition. Maybe it is respect. I want to leave you with something neat to hold, some lesson you can take and apply to your own dark. The truth is Messier. I turned the bell off cycle and bound the grill and pulled a rope that had not been pulled from inside in decades. I made an edit in a pattern. The mountain made an edit in me. We met in the middle like two stubborn people who do not know how to apologize. I keep thinking about the first mispronunciation. I keep thinking about the practice. Last night, the wind slid through the porch screens and said my name perfectly on the first try. Then it added one more syllable I have never told anyone. It rested that syllable against the mesh the way you rest your forehead against a door before someone comes to answer. I stood in the kitchen and counted 10 heartbeats. The sink drip kept time. The oxygen machine found a rhythm and hummed along. I did not move. It waited for me to say the new name back. It waited like a teacher who has learned to be patient with a stubborn student, or a student who has learned to be patient with a stubborn teacher. Which one am I now? Story 2. The hollow that hums the first time it happened off schedule. The hum woke me like a hand on my ribs, low and steady, shaking the windows until the picture of my mother slid crooked on the nail. It came from a hollow that splits the ridge like a scar, a tone as clean as a tuning fork, and it rose the instant I sat up in bed, as if it knew I was awake. I held my breath to see if it would stop. It got higher, like it was listening, like I was a dial someone else was turning in the dark. Company housing smells like damp carpet and old coffee, like copper pennies if the air gets wet enough. The walls are thin enough to hear a neighbor cough. The hum went through the drywall and found my teeth. My fillings ached in time with it. The floorboards vibrated so fine you could mistake it for shivering until the glass on the nightstand began to walk. I put a palm on the window and felt it buzz like a live line. You do not forget that sensation if you work storms. You also do not mention it on the morning check, and unless you want to be a joke. I am Mason Ward, 34, lineman, third year on crews out of Valley Yard. Storm duty puts food on the table, and overtime pays fines you do not want to talk about. 6 weeks of nights, and I would be square. The company house came with the shift. It anchors you close to the lines, close to the map on the wall with greased pencil routes that look like veins. Men in my union like stories until stories start breathing on their necks. Pride will make you act like nothing is wrong when everything is wrong. I am good at pride. There are reasons to stay even when the air feels like a throat. The nearest decent apartment is an hour south. My truck's clutch is one more flare-up from quitting. We do inspections on Thursdays at midnight, top to bottom, so the supervisors can sleep Friday. There's a storm due Saturday. The generator here needs coaxing every 2 hours if the grid goes down. If I leave before the shift ends, I drop on the list. You cannot eat reputation, but you starve faster without it. The hum was not supposed to be there on a Tuesday. It built in a straight ramp like a tone test wasn't enough to taste. Pictures rattled. The clock on the stove missed seconds. I whistled once before I could think better. It paused, just for a beat, like it heard me, like it considered what I had offered it. And then it came back a little closer to the note I made. People say, do not whistle at night in the hills. People say a lot. You do not believe rules until you hear why they were written. In the morning, I drove past the hollow. The soil smelled rich and wet and a little metallic like a nosebleed. An old man stacking wood by the church said not to follow the sound in. He said miners used to cut notches in trees there to mark the pitch when it was bad, so no one would lose a line. I looked and saw shallow V-cuts in a trio of maples by the ditch, all leveled at the same height, weathered gray. He told me birds dropped dead in a circle near the mouth some seasons with no marks on them, and a watch he wore in Vietnam would stop at 12:13 when the earth sang. He laughed like he wanted me to laugh too, so the story would stay small. Tuesday night it came again, and should not have. I took my handheld and walked the gravel while the crew pretended to watch a ball game on a laptop with no sound. The tone thickened in the trees. My radio crackled. It was not static. It was my own voice, a forgotten call from last year repeating my name like a relay test someone saved without me knowing. It said my name in my best clip cadence, and then added the line number I walked that night. It answered before I asked. You ever hear your own voice from a place your mouth is not, late and clear, and feel your chest forget its job for a second? I filed a report because rules are rules. The crew laughed like I knew they would. Men who climb in lightning do not like admitting fear that does not burn. One of the older guys, Bill, kept quiet until the others left the bay. He told me his kid had learned a lullaby for chorus, and he swore the wires sang a bar of it when he was up on a cross-arm after midnight. He would not say it louder than that. He touched the tooth on the left that always ached in spring. He had that glassy look men use when they package up a truth and label it silly for shipping. Wednesday at noon, I walked the hollow line again. Fresh notches cut the bark on 2 new trees where I know there were none. The cuts were clean and bright in the sap, like someone had measured with a level. The air there thrummed, a pressure you feel more than here, the way you feel a subwoofer through a wall. I put my hand on my grandfather's watch. Heavy on the wrist in the day, I turned 16, and he said a man needs a machine that does not ask for a signal. It kept good time until the hum lifted. Then the second hand hesitated, like it wanted a minute to think. At midnight, the valley went dark with the flip. No lightning, no warning. The hum slid under the power cut like a river under ice. The company housing generator coughed to life, rattled, and smoothed out. Then the tone peaked and the generator hiccuped and died. The blackout was so complete the windows looked like holes instead of glass. I stood in the kitchen with a flashlight and felt the beam quiver as if the light itself had a headache. The tone backed down in tiny steps, as if someone were turning a dial with care, as if testing my breath to see when I exhaled. Thursday, I told the supervisor. He wore the look supervisors wear when a man whose record has smudges says a word like hum. He pulled up a slideshow he had prepared years ago about earth noises. Gas vents resonate. Water and rock can make a tone. He used words like microseism and Helmholtz resonance. He was not wrong. He had the comfort of a diagram. He said if the pitch changes indoors, then it is not geological. He said if it follows your breath, it is in your head. He said the hollow had a bell tower. Once that fell in, and people love a story. He said I needed sleep. He was trying to be kind in his way. He was also wrong. That night, the tone rose the second I sat up in bed, and when I lay back down, it sank with me. In the afternoon, I held my mouth closed and counted my breaths through my nose. The pitch followed. I stepped outside, and it followed to the door. It did not care about diagrams. It was learning a rhythm, and it used me for a metronome. I am not an expert, but I have swung off a belt 100 feet up with nothing but leather and will keep me on a pole. I know when something is going to get worse, not better. The storm moved faster than forecast. Wind came down the valley like a train you cannot see. By sunset, the landline sang a false busy. The radio woke itself and played back the men on my crew in tones just off true, like a child doing impressions. Close enough to make you smile until you hear the wrongness. The generator coughed and resumed and coughed again. The men called in to say the road out was already a mess at the Narrows. They signed off with jokes that came out metallic, drag at the ends like tape running low. I could have left with them if I begged. I did not beg. Leaving would have meant stepping off the list for a month and explaining why. Pride could be a stupid god. I stayed with the tone rising and falling underfloor like a tide. The price for whistling back on Tuesday came due. If you teach something the shape of your sound, you cannot complain when it shows up in your mouth. By midnight, the company house had to hum under it like a slow engine. The bed frame vibrated. My fillings ached. I took the watch off my wrist and set it face up. The second hand ticked, then stopped at 12:13. That is a small time, but it felt like a door shutting in a hallway. I promised myself I would not fall asleep, and I fell asleep. I woke with soil under my fingernails and grit in my teeth. The taste was old, damp copper. No footprints tracked the hallway carpet. My boots sat where I had left them by the door. The window was closed. The watch still read 12:13. For a minute, I did not move. The tone was faint. It rested itself like a worker perched on a low wall to drink water before finishing a hard job. My chest hurt like I had been laughing in the cold too long. I stood, and the room lurched as if I had slept on a boat. You know that feeling you get when your body moves before your decision arrives. It had that quality, like the choice had been made without me, and I was only now catching up. At lunch the next day, I went down to the hollow and found a ring of feathers in the brush. No blood. 10 small bodies lay with their necks straight and eyes wide as the sky. A circle, neat as if laid by a compass. I knelt and put a hand above them and felt the air tremble in that low wave between hearable and not. If a tone can bruise a man's ego, it can burst a bird. I called the supervisor again. He stuck to gas vents and water. He sent me a PDF about microbaroms. He spoke about natural resin chambers and how they can hum when pressure and temperature line up. He was doing his job. He warned me not to go into the hollow. He reminded me of the collapsed bell tower and the stories that grew like vines from that root. He softened his voice at the end like he was shrinking the subject so I could carry it without embarrassment. He did not ask me how my breath was. He did not need to. By evening, the wind ramped into the valley like a man who had finally decided to run. The radio spat out laughter from the crew house 2 doors down, except those men had left at noon. A lullaby ran along the lines of a baritone that fit no body I knew. The generator gave a last yawp and died. The ceiling lights blinked. The tone swelled to the floorboards like water through a grate. I felt my breath slide into its rhythm, as if it had always meant to be there. I pressed a hand to my chest and felt it continue without my say. The mouth of the hollow had learned me, one piece at a time. What I did next is not the safest thing I have done. I took a coil of rope, my light, a wedge, and a pry bar. I cut the radio cord at the hand mic and tied the length to a maple at the rim. I left the mic itself in the truck, so I could not chicken out and call for help. If you're going to forgive the choice, do it now. I listened to the wind and the poplars and counted. The storm peak was due at 3. If the resonance grew with the pressure change, I had hours, not days. I set my watch by the clock on the truck. I did not put the watch back on my wrist. It lay face up on the seat like an eye. The hollow swallowed my light. The walls went from raw stone to brick and back to stone where the old shaft met the natural cave. The air tasted like pennies. Every surface had a fine vibration through it, like the whole place was a guitar someone muted with a heavy palm. The rope around my waist creaked against the bark above when I shifted. The hum rose at the edge of hearing and resolved into something too regular to be accident. A pipe organ without pipes. A bell that learned to ring with lungs. You cannot see sound, but you can see its work. The rail from a mine cart line hummed a fraction behind the wall. I put the pry bar against it and felt the metal sing up my arm. My tooth throbbed like a drum hit with a small mallet. The walls pulsed with it, stones ticking their edges against each other until dust filtered down like low fog. Farther in, the passage narrowed to a throat with a belly beyond. There were old timbers sunk into the floor at angles that would not bear weight anymore. The roof moved a whisper. I should have turned back. I did not. I do not think the hollow wanted me dead. I think it wanted me tuned. The pitch slid under my breath and raised it half a step. My lungs followed without my permission. I tried a hold, and it carried me like a conveyor belt carries a crate. I put my fingers on my neck and felt a cadence not my own. The hum was not at me. It was through me, and had learned to go through me because I had whistled like a fool 2 nights before and offered it the key. The notches in the trees above were not warnings, but measures. The old bell tower that fell and had been the first instrument. It needed a second. I jammed the wedge under a slab and worked it with the bar. If I could break the throw of the passage, the tone might flip, or at least stop taking my breath with it. The wedge shook in my hand. The stone moved a thumb's width and caught. I put my shoulder under the bar and shoved. The tone rose into a thin knife of sound and steadied. The watch in my truck seat, out under the rain, froze at 12:13 again, even though I was not looking at it. I did not need the face to feel the stop. The hollow reached me proper then. It took my chest for a test drive. I stood with the bar locked in my grip, and my ribs expanded and fell on a count that matched the pitch changes, precise and wrong. My mouth stayed closed. The sound came from me anyway, a humming that was mine without me in it. My throat buzzed and my lips did not move. The voice it made had my color. If you have ever heard yourself sing in a crowded room on a song you do not know and felt a terror you cannot show, you might know a sliver of what I mean. The birds made sense all at once. A body is a chamber. A skull is a Helmholtz jar with meat on it. A watch is a set of springs that want a rhythm and refuse another. I pressed my tongue hard against my teeth and tried to ruin the tone with a wrong vowel. The hum slid around my sabotage and lifted me into the slot it had carved. It was not cruel. It was efficient. I heaved again on the bar and felt the slab jump and settle and jump. The rope across my waist tightened until it cut. A shard came off the edge of the rock and sang like a glass rim over a wet finger. I imagined it slicing my ankle, cutting a line in me that would whistle on windy days. I shoved and the rock tilted and wedged in tight, pinching the throat of the passage. The tone stuttered like a record throttled between fingers. The count in my chest lost its place and picked up a beat later with a hiccup. Above, the trees would be shivering in a small wind. The notches on their trunks would be vibrating like tiny mouths. The bell in the story would be ringing with no tower to hold it. I held the wedge with both hands until the stone stopped trying to spit it out. The hum peaked, hung, and then dropped a half step like a singer who had been asked to take it down for the audience. My jaw unlocked. I breathed once by choice. That first voluntary breath felt like a loan I could not afford to miss. I backed out with the rope and blinked rain. The watch on the truck seat had its hand snapped hard to 12:13, a second-hand scar you could not rub away with thumb. The valley felt wrong like a vacuum feels wrong when the pump kicks off. Every house on the row looked occupied, though no one was home. The windows shook in their frames one last time in a silent tremolo that had nothing to ride, and then the storm took over the work of shaking. For a while I could only hear wind and water and the frantic beat of my own want to be alive. By morning the hollow was quiet the way a sleeping dog is quiet. You watch the ribs move. You keep your voice down. The crew came back with coffee and stories about trees down at the turn, how the grader got stuck, and the county used a school bus chain to pull it out. They asked why I looked like I had been dug up. I told them I had not slept. It was both true and not. Bill tapped his tooth and said his head felt like he had ridden in a helicopter all night. He did not ask me about a lullaby. The supervisor inspected the map and cleared us for Thursday midnight rounds. Like nothing had happened, and also like a thing had happened that we did not need a name. He told me to log the generator failure and suggested I check the carbon filter in my heater. He did not mention resonance chambers. He did not need to. The men laughed and loaded. The valley moved its shoulder like a boxer at the bell. The watch on my wrist ticked on the hour and lost seconds like a forgetful old man. At exactly 12:13 each night, it stopped, then started, then stopped again until the minute was spent, as if it were trying to remember a story and losing the thread. I kept my job. I did the rounds. I did not whistle for any reason. When I slept, the men in the next unit claimed they could hear me hum through the wall, a tone so low you felt it more than heard it, a sound like a truck far off on a road you could not find. I told them they were imagining it. The truth is I wake with a taste of copper and dirt sometimes, and the feeling that someone has borrowed my chest for a set of scales. The hollow keeps its silence like a promise, but promises on a mountain have clauses. On certain nights, when the pressure drops just right and the temperature blinks at the edge of frost, every window in the valley buzzes for a count of 4, without the air moving. The panes rattle like teeth. Dogs whine and then flatten themselves as if listening for a step. The maples by the ditch shiver along their notches in a sympathy you do not hear unless you go still. I stand on the porch and breathe on purpose. In and out, the rhythm behaves as long as I do, which is a kind of truce I can live with. My grandfather's watch has given up the hour. It keeps only one time well. It finds 12:13 like a man finds a path home in the dark by counting fence posts. The second hand stutters and starts at that minute every night, no matter where I leave it. I could throw in the creek, and I think it would tick there under the stones, patient as an old bell. Sometimes I drive past the hollow and park by the maples and listen to nothing. The silences wait now. It sits on my shoulders like a cable looped the wrong way. The earth smells damp and clean, not copper. The birds come and go like normal birds do. The ring in the brush grew over and grass forgot it. I put my hand on the bark and feel a tremor that might be my own blood. I tell myself that is enough. But last night, I woke from a dream where I was a tower on legs and a rope hung in my chest for a hand to pull. The valley windows trembled without sound. The generator breathed steady in the neighbor house. The clock said 12:12 and the second hand took its time, and every pane seemed to wait for a pitch I could keep without trying. I lay there and did not move. I lay there and listened to the nothing that held a shape like my breath. If you have ever tuned a guitar and felt the other strings sing in sympathy, when you pluck one, you understand a little of what I am now. I am a man who pays his fines and shows up at midnight and will not, under any circumstance, whistle after dark. I am also an instrument that belongs to a place. The hollow that hums is quiet for the moment. The windows shake some nights like they remember a song. My watch keeps at 1 minute like a chapel keeps cool air in the heat. And when the wind runs a ridge just right and the power lines thrum low and the trees lean a degree toward the ditch, I can feel my breath line up on its own, as if the bell that fell down once found a way back into a body. I do not sing. I do not answer. I hold still and count. I hold still and hope that silence is satisfied with being echoed by a man who knows better. Story 3. The Lantern Man of Black Ash Creek. The first time I saw the light on Black Ash Creek, it swung slow between the tree trunks like a clock that did not care about time. It stayed just far enough away that I could not make out the hand holding it. Only the warm circles sliding over wet bark and the black water. When I whisper without thinking, "Hey!" the lantern stopped mid-sway. It tilted a little, not left or right, but like a head considering the voice that called it. The creek mist touched my face like breath. I swallowed and did not call a second time. What if it was listening for a name? My name is Ruby Hensley. I came to the valley to map coal seams for my thesis, not to chase campfire stories. 6 days in a rental cabin, 5 days on the ground, and a grant that would vanish if I came home with nothing but wet boots. My advisor wanted cross-sections. I wanted proof I could outwork a superstition. My boyfriend back in Knoxville said Appalachia eats skeptics for breakfast. I laughed. I said rocks do not care who you are. The creek below the cabin smelled like damp ashes and the faint sulfur of old seams. At night, wet gravel cracked under footsteps I could not place. Maybe it was deer. Maybe. Locals warned me without trying to scare me. They said, do not call out if you see a light down there. Do not wave. Do not follow. Dogs in the valley hate the footbridge over the narrow bend. They dig their nails into the dirt and turn their heads like the bridge stinks. I put a pin in that and kept walking transects with my backpack and my compass that had been true since undergrad. The mist hung like a shawl over the creek and clung to my sleeves. Every sound carried strange. The lantern did not show the second night, and I slept too well. Had I imagined the tilt? On the third night, just before midnight, the lantern bobbed across the water where there is no road and no safe bank. I propped my phone on a fence post and took a run of photos with the longest exposure a humble grad student could afford. When I checked the shots, there was only darkness and a glare line on water where the light should have been. No figure, no flame, the circle of light that my eyes swore was there became a rumor in pixels. I told myself fog scatters light in ways cameras fail to love. I kept the doubt like a pebble in my boot anyway. The first smear showed up in my survey book the next morning. A dull gray thumbprint beside a seam sketch, exactly where I had not touched. I rubbed it and came away with soot on my fingertip, as if I had cleaned a lantern globe without remembering. The mark smelled like kerosene and something older. When the wind came up a hollow, a humming thread wrote it. Not a whistle, more like a half song, a tune a man hums when his mouth is full of tulle and he still needs a rhythm to work. I wrote that down and underlined it twice, then felt foolish for giving a song a line. By noon, I found a miner's helmet wedged in roots at the creek bend, turtle green with age, the brass lamp bracket intact. I told myself it was a prop from a tourist cabin. I lifted it, and cold water poured out like breath withheld too long. The compass needle shivered as if a truck rolled by, but the road is a mile away. It steadied, then quivered again when I set the helmet on the bench. I took a picture, tagged the GPS, and told myself about magnetite in the mud. Then I looked at the water and thought about the nights when flood takes what it wants and does not give it back. The lantern swung on the edge of my thoughts like bait. That evening the hum braided with the river, low and even. It did not come from a direction. It seemed to gather behind my teeth, close to the ache you get before a rain. I stood under the poplar that leans toward the footbridge and whispered hello before I could stop myself. The lantern across the creek paused mid-swing. It tipped again like it recognized the voice and needed a better angle. I left the bank and went back to the cabin with my heart bumping foolishly. At the table, I opened my survey book and stared at a page I did not write. My neat seam sketch had become a loop of lines and circles like a child's treasure map. The pencil was mine. The marks were not mine. In the general store, I asked about the light without saying I had seen it. An old man with a cap that had been washed enough to forget its original team said, "Boys hunt raccoon with kerosene lamps and think it is funny to scare folks from out of town." He told me lamp flame burns yellow and sooty. He told me it is never as far away as you think. He spit into a coffee can like punctuation. The story fit like an old coat, shabby but serviceable. Then he added that his hound will not cross the footbridge after dark, and stared at me to see whether I heard the part he did not say. I heard it. I bought batteries anyway. On the second night, I decided to be smart about it. I set the phone to film and put the compass beside it on a stump. The lantern came early, around 11:45, and crossed the creek to my side with the lazy confidence of a man who knows the bottom. The compass spun like a needle taken off a record. My watch ticked toward midnight and stopped dead at 11:58. I was not moving. I was not breathing. The humming tune got clearer the closer the light came, shifting from breath to a throat sound, work song without words. Then I heard my own voice in the water, quiet as a thought I would not admit. "Come on, Ruby, right here." I left a voice memo on my phone to prove I was not losing it. I described the light and the voice and the smell. When I played it back, I heard only the humming tune, as if I had stood very close to a man singing to himself in a shaft. The pitch tightened at the end like it expected me to sing my name. I turned to walk the footbridge and stopped when a dog from the cabin up the hill started low growling and did not stop. The dog did not bark. He did not run. He lay down on his side and stared at the bridge with the look dogs get when they see a coiled snake. Mapping gives you a false sense of control. You put lines on a page and think you've given a wild thing an address. I tried to triangulate the lantern's path by ear and by a hopeful GPS point that did not want to stick in the hollow. I drew thin pencil lines between trees and the bend. Hours later, while I cooked noodles and tried not to look at the creek, the lines on my page thickened and connected themselves to a loop I had not drawn. The new ink was a shade darker than my pencil. It smelled faintly of lamp smoke. The loop matched the way the light had moved when I closed my eyes to block the glare. What part of me was doing this work? On the third night, fog filled the cabin clearing like a living thing come to see how I kept house. I heard the humming tune before I saw the lantern. The light appeared inside the circle of wet stones where I had made a fire the first day, as if the ground were a hand cupping it. There were no footsteps, no carrier. The glass looked clean and the flame steady and a little too yellow, like the old man said, and also not like any wick I knew. The lantern tipped toward me like a bow. Then it went dark as if pressed between fingers. The darkness it left behind had weight to it. For a long count, I could not see my own hand. I listened for water rising and heard only my breath. At dawn, the county posted flood warnings. The road out dipped underwater in 2 places. The store closed and the old man hung a cardboard sign with "back at noon" that lied without meaning to. The couple up the ridge strapped suitcases to an ATV and hollered up the hill for their dog, who remained planted by the bridge like it was his job. My laptop breathed rain through a seam I thought was sealed. The keyboard died politely 1 row at a time. I did the math. If I wanted anything to show for the week, I had to finish the map here and now. If I wanted to get out, I had to cross that bridge at some point. Everything narrowed to a single wet line of boards over fast water. My advisor called before the cell tower drowned. He asked about deliverables and sample logs, and whether I had nabbed anything publishable. He said rain makes miners honest. I said the creek made my compass honest too, and he pretended he had not heard me. He told me be careful, and also not to miss a chance to collect. I hung up and listened to the tune that had been lingering in the trees. It was clearer now, a hum bar that felt like the midpoint of a lullaby and the midpoint of a work song, the place where men gather breath in a rhythm that keeps arms moving. It worked its way into my chest the way a splinter works toward the surface. I wrote that down. The ink shifted shade when I looked away. Afternoon gave me my partial answers. I laid my scene maps over the topo with tracing paper and saw that the loops on my rewritten pages curved along old survey lines that had nothing to do with coal. They matched tunnels I had seen in an archive once, an annotated flood map from 1910, when a shaft took water and 6 men did not come back. The helmet at the bend looked like one in the photograph. My notes have been helping me make a different map, not of rock bodies, but of drowned paths under the creek. I stared at the footbridge and thought about a hand counting boards, not out, but in, once marked. Always seen, the old woman at the laundromat had said about a different story. The phrase fit pressier. The prank story failed the next hour when the rain came hard. The lantern slid out from between the trees and floated above the rocks like a patient fisherman. The flame did not gutter. It did not hiss when spray touched it. When the creek slopped up and over the lower stones, the light dipped through the splash as if protected by a bubble you could not see. I thought about kerosene and wicks and the way physics likes to frown at tricks. The scent that rode the rain to my door was soot and something colder than water. I believed the part about boys and lamps as much as I believed I had rewritten my pages while I slept. At 11:45, I put on my rain shell and took the compass and a cheap headlamp to the footbridge. The boards flexed under my weight like ribs. I did not tie a rope to my waist because that would have been smart, and I had something to prove to myself about being brave instead of careful. The rule I set was simple. If I reached the far side before 12:13, I would turn and count steps back and never see the lantern again. If the needle stopped spinning before I crossed, I would not try to jump. I would accept that I was marked and see where that mark wanted me. It felt like a fair contract until I put my foot on the first board. The dog up the ridge whined once and went quiet. The lantern appeared at the far end of the bridge and held still. The humming tune widened into harmony, as if other voices were making room. The helmet I had found floated out of the roots and bumped the support post like a greeting. My compass needle turned with a nervous energy that made the hair on my arms lift. Rain tightened into a curtain. I put my hand on the cable and stepped. 1, 2, 3. It is amazing how long a single board can be when the river underneath wants your feet. Halfway out, I understood the map I had been drawing. The loops were not errors. They were returns. The drowned tunnels did not go away when the water took them. They were still down there, ribs under skin, full of black water that remembers which way it ran. The humming swelled into a shape my body recognized before my mind did. Work song for a pump handle. Lullaby for men too tired to come home. Ruby, someone sang in a tone I have used to comfort children in clinics. Right here. The flame leaned toward me like a man leaning across a table to help with a story. It wanted me to keep time. I thought the lantern was trying to lead something out. That was the mercy version I had kept in a pocket, like a warm stone. The truth was colder. The light was looking for someone to lead in, someone with a map and a mouth. Replacements. You think you are rescuing and you are counting off your own boards. The dog on the hill barked once, high and thin like a string breaking. My watch ticked in my pocket, though it had been dead since last night. The sound it made was not ticks, but tiny knocks, the way a ring makes against a jar when someone holds it. I dropped the compass into the creek, not to be dramatic, but because the needle had started to steady toward the lantern, as if it had found north in a place where north is wrong. The splash made the flame blink and come back. Then the light split itself across the water, like a coin clinks into many pieces. I saw one, then three, then a line of small lanterns riding the current like eyes. The humming rose in a chorus, and the words sharpened without entirely forming. Names. They wanted names. They wanted mine. They wanted me to turn and call each light to me and teach them the shore. I fought the urge to count. Counting is how a bridge makes you forget the distance left. Counting is how you become an instrument instead of a person. The board shivered. The cable hummed in a tone I could have matched if I had let myself open my mouth. For a second, the nearest light brushed my boot, and it was not hot. It was a temperature below cold, like water held in cast iron long after the fire dies. My shadow rippled out under the bridge, and one little lantern caught it like a fish catches a fly. For a breath, I felt tugged at the ankle by nothing but attention. I stepped into the mud along the beam, let it suck my heel, and the tug gave. That move was ugly and it worked. I reached the far side of the bridge and turned because I could not look. The line of lights had recombined into one swinging lamp at the center of the span, careful as a man setting a weighted object on a shelf. The helmet spun in place and stopped, facing me like a face. The humming fell to a single held note and ended the way a story ends when the teller decides you do not deserve the last line yet. Back at the cabin, my survey book lay open to a page I had not seen, a careful tracing of a loop that circled my campsite and the footbridge and the band. The ink was darker than my pencil. The margin smelled like lamp smoke and rain. I burned those pages because I needed one thing I could finish. The paper curled and blackened the way paper does. Soot lifted and freed itself in tiny threads that hung in the air longer than smoke should. The humming retreated to the tree line like a dog called off by a voice I could not hear. I slept with my boots on and dreamed a zipper dark that opened only when I stopped trying to push it. In the morning, the road out stood clear and shining like nothing bad had ever lived there. I packed what the rain had not ruined. I did not go back for the helmet. I did not touch the bridge with my hand. Back in Knoxville, my advisor read the surviving pages with a face I could not love or reach. He said the data looked incomplete. He said the sketches went soft. He scrubbed a thumb over a corner and frowned and smelled his hand, without meaning to. He granted me a reschedule and a warning and sent me home. My thesis sat in a draft folder and gathered a layer of silence. The grant passed to a student who likes drones and thinks in 3D. I told myself a map can be a warning even if it does not get bound in a library. I told myself the creek will take what it wants whether I write it down or not. At night in my apartment, when the city hum drops low and the neighbor's kid finally stops bouncing a ball, I hear a thin tune that fits exactly in the space between a lullaby and a work song. It is there at 11:58, like a worse kind of clock. The panes in the window glow as if a lantern swings somewhere behind them, and the glass holds memory better than I do. I keep my survey book in a drawer with a rubber band around it, and I do not open it because the blank pages smudge with lamp soot on nights when no one else is awake. Sometimes a line appears, curved and neat, pointing toward a place I do not intend to go. If you have ever had your name called from a direction you cannot point to and felt your legs want to step before your mind decides, you know the risk that sits in my chest. When the light pauses and tilts toward my window, it feels like a head listening for the sound I made by accident that first night, a small word lifting off breath and crossing water. I do not give it another. I put my hand flat on the glass and feel nothing but my own heat. The lantern waits the way a creek waits after rain, quiet patient, knowing you will cross when you must and that you will count boards because counting feels like power. Sometimes I want to write out the tune to see whether it breaks on paper the way other dangerous things do when you name them. Sometimes I want to go back and listen until I can hear the words it never said. I do neither. I pay rent. I go to class. I replace the compass I threw away and leave in the drawer because now I do not trust it anywhere near my breath. When the clock turns 12:13 and every sound in the apartment seems to hold still for a thin second, I think about the bridge and the way the light split and came back together. I think about men who went in without a map and stayed. If you ever wake to a warm circle of glow sliding across your ceiling, as if someone were walking below your window with a lantern that should not be there, do not say hello to be polite. Do not count to calm yourself. Stand very still and let your breath belong to you. The lantern man of Black Ash Creek does not live in my city, but sometimes I feel him on the other side of the glass, patient as water, clever as a rumor, and just close enough to make me tilt my head to hear. That is when I close the notebook and watch the light fade. That is when I let the humming pass without taking a step. Story 4. The widow's bell the first night I camped in Grey Widow Hollow. The bell rang for a funeral no one had scheduled. One clean strike rolled down the empty street at 2:14, full as a heartbeat and cold as rainwater. The tower rope had rotted away decades ago. I knew, because I had photographed the stump of it that afternoon, a tassel of fibers like hair in a comb. Still, the sound came, and when it passed through the canvas of my tent, it seemed to settle inside my ribs like a held breath waiting to be let out. I lay there and counted until I lost count. Nothing moved in town. That was the problem, and the hook that kept me listening. I am Daniel Mercer, land surveyor, hired by the Historical Trust to capture the last angles of a dying place before developers erase it. I prefer documents over people. Records do not argue. Nails and boards tell their stories the way I ask. The brief said Grey Widow Hollow had been abandoned since the 50s after mine flood and the road washouts. My sister, who still lives in the county, told me not to camp here. She pressed a small silver locket into my hand in the grocery parking lot and said, "Do not hear it twice," and left before I could pretend to laugh. The locket smelled faintly of rain. I wore it because I did not want to think about why she had kept it. The town had the gray look of a photograph losing its blacks. Mold sweetened the hymn books on the pews. Mildew wrote its soft script on the plaster behind the pulpit where water had found seams. The church stood on a terrace above the road. Belfry opened the sky like a mouth. Below the cemetery wall, a grave cracked open at the corner, as if the ground had taken a long breath and forgotten to let it out. The stone read Widow Talia Greer. Born 1891. Died 1951. No date carved for the day or month. Whoever loved her either could not afford the final chisel or decided she would finish it herself. I recorded every coordinate and took pictures from every angle that mattered. The bell rope nub in the tower, the cemetery that leaned, the schoolhouse with 2 desks tipped like knock-knees, a hymnal left open on a lectern, swollen with damp and stuck to "Nearer, my God, to thee." The page edges had furred with mold, but I could still see the notes marching up and down. I set my tripod and took a long shot of the tower, braced against a headstone that had no name left. Evening came early, as it does in hollows. The air felt iron-scented, the way rain feels before it decides to arrive. I told myself I would listen for one night and leave in the morning with sensible notes. The first hole at 2:14 hit clean. No flutter at the edges, no metal tiredness, no wind playing it a trick, not a far clap of thunder, not rockfall. The clapper on a bell that was real and present and had sense enough to reach straight into my tent and ask whether I was ready. I stepped outside and saw nothing moving. The rope stub on the beam looked like it always had. I told my recorder, timestamp, single toll, unknown source, and heard my voice again from inside the church, muffled. I froze the way a dog freezes when it hears a step it does not know. Cold ran through the hollow like a new creek finding its bed. There's an engineer's note in a file somewhere that says underground water pressure can vibrate large structures of resonance and trick your ear. I had read it before I came. It is a good theory. You can pin to a cork board and leave it there and feel like you have hung something true. But when I climbed the stairs the next morning and my boot soles left tidy damp prints on wood that had not known warmth in years, and I put my hand on the bell, that steel was quiet and cold, not trembling at all. Inside the belfry, the rope stump hung, with its fibers curled like a burned wick. No mechanism, no one hiding and laughing. The wind gusted, and the pages of the open hymn book below did not stir. I set my smart level against the beam and shot another photo. When I checked the screen, a full rope hung in the frame, fat and clean, looped around the rim as if a sexton had just stepped away for lunch. I looked up from the camera at bare air and looked back down at the shot and saw the rope again. The image made my palms slick. I told myself I had captured an old photograph reflected across the lens. I took a third shot. The rope had moved an inch to the right. I did not like that. I kept my face as plain as a survey stake and wrote, "Anomalous artifact, temp. Delete," and I did not delete it. The map in my lap that afternoon picked up smudges I could not place. Faint gray ovals blurred across my pencil lines like thumbprints I had not left. They repeated down the street at 3 points, then doubled back to the church, then marched up the hill toward the widow's stone. When I rubbed them with my knuckle, they darkened and took on a shape I recognized only because of the morning. Clappers. Little shadows of clappers, as if someone with a dirty hand had set them down to rest between rings. I pressed my knuckles hard until my skin squeaked on the paper and felt silly in a way that makes you want to whistle in a room you should not whistle in. At dusk, my sister texted, "You there?" I sent a photo of the church cut clean against the sky and did not send the one of the rope. She called and I let it ring. The road up to the ridge had rutted from a pocket rain, and the forecast Friday storm would chain me here if I did not finish. My contract threatened penalties if I missed the deadline. The developers like to swing big machines at places like this. They preferred flat truths. I prefer quiet ones. I decided to stay and work past midnight with a headlamp and keep an ear open for whatever the bell thought it knew. At 2:14 the second night, the bell hit once and the air in the nave seemed to thicken, like water about to set. As the note decayed, I caught a shimmer under beam where the rope should be, a length of nothing that wasn't nothing. Shadows that do not know they are shadows. The shimmer swung very slightly as if I had moved it with my stare. In the broken glass of the entry door, I saw my own mouth moving the way a man's mouth moves when he breathes through effort, lips set, teeth bare. My hands hung at my sides like they had done nothing wrong. I did not talk to myself. I do now. On the way back to the tent, the cemetery soil powdered under my boot like bread rising. I walked a crack by Talia Greer's stone and set my flashlight beam just inside. Wet earth shone slick, then softened as the light warmed it, and a pinprick drop fell inward like a tear falling back into an eye. The names on the neighboring markers stood out white, fresh, as if someone had scrubbed them in daylight. The last burial date in this place was 1950, but the dirt at 3 plots forked as if a trowel had practiced there in the morning. The road breathed late rain, and I smelled the iron of it in my teeth. Back in the tent, my notebook read a line I had not written. "Next is you." The letters were mine, a little cramped from writing on my knee. The way I always write in the field. I took a photo of the page and watched the words fade in the viewfinder, as if they had been written in disappearing ink. I set the locket on the page. The silver felt cool, and then warmer and warmer until I had to move it. A whistle of air pushed through the tent zipper and tilted the locket open. Inside was a pressed sprig of some brittle plant I did not know. The smell that rose was rain. I snapped it shut and hung on its chain around my neck, and the air in the tent cleared like fog lifting. On the third day, a man from the next county came up the Wash Road in a Tacoma and asked what I was doing. He said he was born in a trailer that used to sit by the store and moved before the second flood. He said the bell rang the night before his father drowned at the bridge below the highway, down to the exact minute they wrote on the paper at the hospital. He had the look of a man asking for an argument and dreading it. I gave him the engineer's note. He nodded like you nod at a sentence you will not take into your house. He said the bell makes no mistakes about the living, but lies to the dying. I did not ask what he meant. He got back in his truck and left heat in the shape of a man on the seat. All afternoon, the idea comforted me that water had a math all its own, and the belfry sat on that math like a drum on a skin. I can live with math. I cut strips of beeswax earplugs and shaped them to fit, the way we do with generators when they sing too bright. I set the plugs in at 2:05 and lay on the altar step with my head against the wood to feel the vibration as data, not omen. When the bell struck at 2:14, the note did not arrive through air. It arrived through bone. It climbed my skull like a hand on a rung, one knuckle at a time, and nested in that soft square where a baby's skull stays open longer than you think. The hymn book page turned itself to the next verse with careful breath, and the word nearer, nearer, nearer landed under my thumb. I tried to be rational, which is to say I tried to be stubborn. I went out into the rain to photograph the tower from the south when the brim of water rolling in the street dipped and recovered. My camera made a happy little click. On the screen, the rope had returned, full length, and I could see fibers moving like a living muscle. Behind the glass of the door, my reflection leaned in and set its hands like it meant to draw a breath that was not mine. I set the camera down as if it were an expensive egg and backed into the aisle until I felt the pew touch the back of my knees. I wished suddenly that I believed in a God who could take some noise out of bell and leave the rest for me to carry. The storm came early and made the valley into a windpipe. The two bad places on the road drowned in brown water and rose again and drowned. The creek below the church changed color. The radio crackled once and sizzled and lay down. My phone battery blinked its small red plea and went silent. The town shrank to a theater with one actor and one audience. I kept working because working feels like control until it turns into a ritual you cannot explain. At 1:55, I set a hand on the banister and began to climb. At 2:10, I stood in the belfry and saw, as plain as my palm, a rope that did not exist drape itself down from the beam to my hands. And my hands raised themselves as if they had been taught. The locket at my throat went hot like a coin on a burner. My palms burned cold where the rope met them, the way ice burns when you stay on it. My breath shortened to the count of a thing about to happen. The hymn below turned a page by itself as if the church were ready to sing along. Out the louvres, the cemetery leaned in the rain. The widow's cracked corner widened a finger's width with a sound, then closed, then widened again like a patient mouth. The smudges on my map had aligned themselves to a path that ran from 3 houses to the church and up the hill in a neat procession. I knew the pattern without admitting it. 1 strike for a stranger whose face I had seen on a morning drive. 2 strikes of my sister's voice on a line that would not connect. 3 for me. The first pull came from nowhere and everywhere. The rope tightened under my palms, and the bell swung and hit. 1 clean toll ran through the hollow and out into the rain and up into me. I had not pulled. I had been pulled. The locket between my throat and shirt flared warm, and on the second swing it muffled the note a little, made it late by a heartbeat. I felt foolish gratitude for that delay. In the graveyard, the widow's stone shifted another inch as if rising for a sit that takes effort. I told myself a wrong thing then. I told myself the bell predicts. The truth was in front of me and waiting for me to learn it. The bell does not predict. It assigns. When the rope moved for the third strike, it expected my hands to help. My muscles, trained on ladders and lines, answered before I did. The rope burned channels into my skin that I will carry until winter does not bite them anymore. I closed my fists and held and let the rope run, then grabbed and let it run, the way you give a wild thing slack and take it back in little bits. Below, the hymn book flipped the page, as if the music had already been chosen. The clapper swung forward and waited at the ear of the bell, like a man deciding whether to knock. I had seconds or less before whatever it summoned climbed the last step. The locket moved like a heartbeat, and I remember my sister's voice. Do not hear it twice, which is not how language works unless it is. I put the silver in my mouth because I did not know where else to put my desperate. The taste of rain bloomed on my tongue. I felt the rope want. I did not want. It made an awful duet. My grip slipped, and I wrapped the rope with my forearms and let it burn them instead of me moving it. The clapper came late and struck off center. A split song, 2 notes instead of 1. The bell's lip cracked a thin line, a flaw becoming a sentence. The sound that came out had an error in it, where errors might matter. Down the hill, the widow's grave lifted, then sank, then lifted, then held, as if a body had changed its mind and then did not. A hand, or the idea of a hand, showed dirt like it was a curtain. Rain washed the line away and drew it back. I felt in my throat, not my ears, a second tone between tones that bent the first toward harmless, just enough. The rope gave like a grudging friend. I stumbled hard and hit the beam with my shoulder, and a splinter went on the skin that I would later carry out with tweezers and a prayer. The locket fell out of my mouth and hit the floor and sang the tiniest bell sound I have ever not wanted to hear. Silence filled the belfry, not like absence but like decision. The rain wrote its fast cursive on the shingles. The rope, if that is what it was, hung suddenly as a frayed ghost again. The crack in the bell looked like a hair on a photograph. The hymn book pages stilled. Below, the church smelled for a moment like candles that had been blown out without ever being lit. In the graveyard, the line of fresh soil settled a breath and did not lift again. I leaned my forehead against the beam and learned what it means to be held up by a thing you've been fighting. By dawn, the town had that rinse look places get when they choose their side. The road drained. The creek pulled its brown back into itself. I took pictures of new angles that were the same old angles and wrote notes I did not like to read aloud. The bell hung with a hairline crack, quiet and ashamed. On my map, the clapper smudges had dried as faint as memory. I stepped over the cemetery wall and set my hand flat on Talia Greer's stone. The chill deepened against my palm as if the stone had kept a seat for me. I thanked her for staying, which felt right even if it meant nothing. The word went down into the crack and did not come back. Back in town a week later, the trust thanked me and filed my survey and said I did not need to put any supernatural notes into the official record. The developer nodded through a meeting like a man passing a familiar fence and said he would take the bell down humanely and store it for a museum that had no building yet. My sister cleaned my rope burns with iodized swabs and told me this was why you wear gloves. The locket rested cool and ordinary in my palm, innocent as a coin. I asked where she got it. She said it was our mother's and not to ask more, and that she was glad the thing had cracked. I did not ask more. We are careful with the kinds of family stories that hold back, whether at night in the city. The old church by my apartment stays shut after 9. Pigeons claim the gutters. The bell there is electric and respectable, and the priest set it for holidays and noon. Still, some Tuesdays, when I walk past at bad hours with the kind of hunger that only work quiets, I feel a sound go through my coat that has nothing to do with cars or trains or any bell that knows my name. 2:14 arrives on phones and watches and microwaves all the same way, neutral and precise. Somewhere inside that minute, a thin note whispers against my ribs like a fingertip looking for a scar. In one of my photographs from Grey Widow Hollow, framed now on my desk to prove to myself that a place can choose not to die, the belfry beam is sharp and the rope stump is there, and the bell lip is clean. If I look long enough, if I let my eyes go soft the way you do with old stereograms until another picture leaps, I can see a second image settle on top like dust. In it, a man is pulling a rope and the man is me. His mouth is set hard, and his hands have not learned the trick yet of letting burns stand in for movement. A hairline crack splits the bell as thin as a hair. The grave across the road is thinking about the weather. I tell myself the assignment ended when I drove away, and the rain followed other roads. I tell myself that the bell gave me a pass I did not earn, and that passes like that do not renew. Mostly I believe it. On certain nights, though, when the city is tired of itself and falls quiet in a way that does not feel like peace, I hear a half note of him drift in from somewhere just out of frame. Pages that are not their turn themselves. A rope I cannot see tightens around nothing. My palms remember their lesson and itch. The locket warms a fraction and cools. I did not count aloud, and the minute passes. If you ever find yourself above a town that lost its people but kept its bell, and you hear a single strike drift down a wet street for no one, you will want to solve it. Part of that one will be love, and part of it will be pride, and part of it will be the quiet wish to own the trick that owns you. Be careful with that. Mechanisms break in ways that matter. Stones crack along lines that seem harmless. When the rope makes itself out of air and meets your hands, the bell will ask you one question with 100 words. Who will carry the next sound? If you are wise, you will set your hands behind your back and listen until the question becomes a silence you can live beside. Story 5. The Ashmouth Road. The first time I saw myself standing in the lane ahead, I thought it was a trick of fog and nerves and too much caffeine. Headlights flattened the man into a pale cutout, but the way he lifted his hand to wave me down matched my own lazy half circle I use when I am too tired to be polite. I eased the rig, blinked, and the lane was empty again, the reflector posts peering like thin white teeth. I told the dispatcher I was fine. I told myself the same thing twice, just to hear it sound ordinary. You learn how a night road should smell when you live on it. Wet tar, skunk once in a while, the sour of a ditch that never drains right. Ashmouth Road had the wrong smell. It had the dry stink of burned leaves while everything around it dripped. The GPS snapped me onto that road after an interstate washout and promised I would cut 20 minutes. I told the screen I loved it. I told the clock I would make the dock at 6. Trucks keep their promises like people do. They try until they fail. My name is Jamie Pruitt. 32. Long haul. I am the guy who jogs the back roads and swears he knows the hills better than the GPS. The dispatcher calls me shortcuts when she is feeling nice and something else when she is not. The bonus for this run depended on the dot on her screen arriving on time. Gas set a hair above a quarter tank, which is not a sin if the miles behave. The map showed an old timber bridge and a notch in the ridge. Ash flicked in the high beams like moths that have forgotten their bodies. I rolled the driver's window down and heard a voice in my exact pitch tell me to pull over. I said, "Not funny," and checked the CB. The radio crackled and then settled into my dispatcher's steady rhythm. That friendly sarcasm that usually calms me down. She said, "You're doing fine. Keep it at 50. We are green on traffic." I put my thumb on the talk button and said, "Copy, 50, appreciate you." And then her voice on the speaker said, "Copy, 50, appreciate you." Before I could finish, I let the button go and swallowed. The taste in my mouth was soot, old campfire smoke that comes back on your tongue when you cough in bed. I took a drink from the water bottle, and it tasted the same. You know how sometimes a stretch of road is longer than it should be, like the county shifted the paint and forgot to move the land. Ashmouth felt that way. I passed a wreck I had clocked before, a sedan fused the asphalt aslant. Its windows black, as if someone had stuck tar paper on them. Steam might rise off a hot hood in rain. This car breathes nothing. Twice I passed it. The same bent antenna, like a finger pointing at me. The CB muttered with my own chuckle from 5 minutes earlier. You can hear your laugh and not recognize it. Late like that. At mile 3, the man in the lane returned. He stood with his shoulders forward like mine get when I am tightening a ratchet strap in wind. Same jacket. Same bend in the brim of the cap. He didn't flag me hard, just raised his palm like we were old friends and he was asking for a favor. I braked, blinked, and the lane was empty. The ash fell thicker for a breath, and then thinned as if it found something to settle on. A mile marker with a scratch tally leaned into the ditch. 5 thin verticals, and space for one more. The 6th cut had a start to it, a shallow white nick like a scratch that changed its mind. Look, I'm not saying I believed any of it in that moment. I believed in the bonus and in the shape of the next turn, and in the way a truck sings different when the grade changes. I told a dumb joke on the CB about ghosts needing hazard vests, and the radio played me the same dumb joke back in my same voice. Overlapped by half a second. It is a small thing, that overlap, but it can take your stomach and drop it. Out the side mirror, I saw ash swirling behind the trailer in a spiral that should not have been possible with no wind. You see and you pretend not to see so you can keep moving. The road stretched. The odometer told a story, and my eyes told another. I passed the melted sedan a 3rd time, and the smell of scorched metal came through vents I had set to fresh air. It coated my throat. My GPS map stuttered and froze with my truck icon, sitting in the middle of a shapeless gray. 49 miles per hour on the dash. 0 on the display. The numbers wrong fitted like 2 answers in the same slot. I tapped the screen gently, the way you tap a dog that is dreaming to remind it you are there, and it did not change. When the figure landed on the hood, it did not dent metal. It poured itself onto the slope like smoke pretending to be weight. Headlights turned it into a shape I could not deny. My own face leaned toward the windshield with the expression I wear when I wake in a hotel. And I am not sure what town is outside. It puts palm on the glass, and I put mine against it like a man checking a window for leaks. The temperature changed through that contact, a cold that did not sting so much as flatten. The figure's mouth opened as if to say my name, and a soft gray sift fell from its lips and skittered along the wipers like dry rain. I told myself a story about chemical fires underground. I had seen the videos. Coal seemed smolder for years and make weird weather. Fog that tastes like pennies. Ash that drifts in summer when no one is burning. It would explain a lot if the fog did not sometimes form my initials on glass in a messy child's hand. If the drifting did not harden into the shape of driver boots at the shoulder, toe prints pointed at the lane. If a mile marker tally did not gain a faint 6th line right in front of me without a hand to carve it, my phone slid from its suction cradle with the easy grace of a thing that has given up. The battery icon flashed once, and the screen went black. The CB learned new modes of rude. It stopped pretending to be the dispatcher and started pretending to be me, but from tomorrow. I heard myself say into the little speaker, calm as a man telling himself the weather will hold. I can still make it if I keep it at 50. And the second version of me said the words while my mouth stayed closed. I pressed the talk, and my thumb shook enough to make the mic click twice. If you have ever heard yourself make promises your body cannot keep, you know the feeling that came next. Gas gauges are liars in the mountains. They stay put on a slope and then fall like a drunk off a porch when you level out. Mine was dropping with no reason, but this road. 3 hours was not what it said now. It was an hour and change if the draw continued like this. The ash fell again and the wipers squeaked. I wanted to open the window and scoop a handful to prove it was something ordinary that just looked wrong. I cracked the glass and the voice came in soft as a voice in a dream. My voice begging, pull over, pull over, pull over, like a lullaby played wrong. Too fast, too strained. I tried speed. Sometimes the only fix for a bad thought is outrunning it until a better landscape forces your mind to change. I put my foot down gently to avoid a fishtail and watched the double yellow slide under. The figure in the lane was patient with speed. It moved with me, keeping the same distance, 10 truck lengths, then 5, then 3, without jogging. It raised its hand not like a warning, but like a greeting for someone coming home. I watched the ash strike the glass in powdery lines and felt it in my mouth as if I had licked a fireplace brick as a kid and was being punished again. At mile 10, the melted sedan was half an inch deeper into the asphalt, or my head wanted it that way. The rain had the tight, fine texture of mist hurled hard. The timber bridge I had expected was not here. The notch in the ridge looked like a mouth closed against a question. My dispatcher pinged me, message bubble blipping up on the dead phone like a light under ice. Then gone. The CB made the sound I make when I am about to lie. It is a small hitch before a confident tone. I did not like hearing it from a box. There's a theory I have about panic. It needs a ritual. It wants your hands doing something to feel like control. I found the locket my daughter had jammed into the cup holder at the last truck stop. She makes me buy the little junk machines near the claw prizes. It was cheap metal with a heart pressed on crooked. She had put a picture of her cat inside. Third grade logic says a charm keeps the world from being mean in one specific way. I am a grown man. I held the thing anyway, because that is what daughters do to you. At mile 13, the figure stood dead center, inches from the bumper. The ash swirled into a small, private storm around it, a cyclone the height of a human body. I eased the truck to a stop, because not stopping is a choice you live with forever. The engine chuffed and shuddered and stalled with its own decision, and the gauge dropped to E in a theatrical swoop that made me want to laugh. The GPS map kept me frozen mid-road with my little icon blinking, as if it were breathing shallow. Delivery hour crawled toward me while the road climbed into the cab through the vents and took the shape of my breath. Up close, the reflection did not need headlights. It gave off a second light, like moonlight has learned grammar. It leaned its head at me the way people do when they pretend they cannot hear, though we both knew it could. The ash thickened inside its mouth when it opened it. My own voice came out, firm as when I negotiate for a drop time slot. Already late, already promising I am almost there. It was not mocking. It was practicing. It did not want me to die. It wanted me to hand at the wheel. The tires made a soft sound, rubber on a hot skillet. The smell was hair catching in the candle flame. Outside the passenger window, the mile marker tally lifted a new line out of itself, the shallow cut deepening like a paper slice widening under pressure. The CB blurted my dispatcher's upcoming scold in my voice, the one she had not delivered yet. She said, "You always have a story, don't you? Shortcuts." And I said it back without wanting to, and the reflection tilted like a dog who's been taught a trick and wants the treat that follows. You can say I should have run the figure down. People say that about deer too. Trust a bumper. Keep straight. Physics is your friend. Maybe. The ash on the windshield wrote my initials from the inside. J.P. The P drifted as if a finger had pressed into dust and moved slowly. I thought about the melted sedan. I thought about the taste in my mouth that was more smoke than fear. I thought about my daughter's cat and the way she says his name like it is the first word she ever learned. I cracked the door, and the ash storm leaned into cab like a face into a mirror. The reflection looked at the lock in my hand, the way men look at wallets at the counter, measuring time and cost. It lifted its hand, palm out, to match me. I put the locket against the Ashmouth, because sometimes you have to offer a wrong thing to break the right bad rhythm. The metal heated fast enough to singe my thumb, and the ash caught around it like water around a stone and spun, and the reflection's face buckled, not like pain, but like a mask suffering air. The engine coughed as if surprised to be invited back. Lights jumped brighter. The melted feeling in the tires eased. The Ashmouth closed and opened again and found little to say. My voice through the CB mispronounced the dispatcher's name, which I would never do. The mile marker tally 6 line held like a chalk mark that rain cannot erase. The figure stepped back and stepped forward at the same time, and then folded in, collapsing into a pile of gray in the exact shape of 2 boots pointed my way, toes barely touching. I turned the key and the engine chose to stay alive. I feathered the throttle and felt the truck test the asphalt. A patch under the front tires had softened in a way I will not forget. It felt like the first step on a dock that has come loose. The ash boots did not scatter when the air shifted. They waited like a person with a plan and no rush. The soot on the steering wheel shaped a handprint that was not mine. I did not grip like that. The ring finger sat a little crooked, as if it had been broken once and never set right. I pulled around the pile slow enough to measure the distance with my heartbeat. The figure did not reform. The ash lifted in a line, then settled, then feathered away with a reluctance that made me feel rude for leaving. The GPS map came back with my icon lurching ahead like a fish freed from a net. The CB went quiet the way a kid goes quiet when a parent walks in, too sudden to be innocent. I did not look in the mirror, which is a skill. I looked at the yellow paint and trusted it for a change. The dock arrived when the clock said it had run out of patience. 6:17, my phone announced when it regained its courage. The manager signed with a shrug that bothered me only because I want to fight. The dispatcher did not shout. She did that calm tone that means the write-up is already in the system. Probation. No bonus. Still employed. I signed my name. The pen left a faint soot line where my palm had rested on the dash so long. I cleaned it with a napkin, and it left a gray smile on the paper. On the lot, in idle, the truck smells wrong. Not fuel, not rubber. Something like hair cooked on a curling iron. The gas gauge sticks on empty even after I fill, as if the tank had learned a new truth and will not share the old. The mechanic at the yard wipes it with a rag and says send it in for calibration. Easy fix. And I gnaw like a man who believes in easy fixes because on most days I am that man. I ask him if he smells something. He says he smells me needing a shower and laughs the way men laugh when they do not want to talk about what they know they smelled. At night, the air vents cough a little, and ash drifts out as if someone has been smoking in my cab while I sleep. The mirrors offer back a view of the yard that sometimes holds a thin fog that is not there when I step out. I see myself in the rear view, sometimes standing on the dark shoulder of Ashmouth Road, waving slow, patient friendly, the way a man waves a flag down someone he recognizes, and I look away like a guy who has somewhere to be. The soot handprint on the wheel fades slow, not all at once, as if someone likes the shape and is reluctant to let it go. People ask me whether I turned around, whether I went back to see if the pile was there in daylight, whether the tally on the mile marker kept the 6 cut. I pretend I do not remember where the turn is. I let the GPS pretend too. Pretend gets you through a lot. If you ever find yourself on a road where ash falls when no fire burns and your own voice asks you, kindly as you talk to a child, to pull over, think about the cheap metal charm in your cup holder and what silly protection feels like when a room changes shape. Think about how a road might feed, not on bodies, but on drivers, the way a story feeds on a person willing to say it first. I am not telling you to throw anything into a mouth that shouldn't exist. I am telling you that a pattern wants to be kept. If you see yourself smile from the lane and you feel the dry taste on your tongue, do not match the smile. Do not roll the window. Keep both hands on the wheel and watch for the place where the asphalt wants to keep your tires. You will see it before you feel it. If you are lucky, if you are not, you will feel it, and you will still have time to choose. There is a rumor that the melted cars at mile 4 and 8 and somewhere after 13 were all the same day seen wrong. I do not like that rumor because it makes me feel like time is a rubber band and I am the finger it snaps. I like the rumor that men and women who stopped became helpful. Waving the next person down before the road could do worse. It is a merciful version of trouble. It is a way to live with a handprint that never quite goes away. Last week I drove a different back road to avoid a different mess, and the ash fell again for 3 breaths. Not enough to be sure of, just enough to make me salty. The CB coughed and tried my laugh on for size and gave up. The dispatcher said my name the way my mother says it when she is trying not to be mean. I touched the locket still in the cup holder. Empty now because the cat photo had fused to the glass and came apart the day after the run. It felt light in my hand, cool, clean. I put it back and did not open it. If I pass you on a 2-lane and you see me watching the shoulder too much, do not read it as fear. Read it as respect for a road that wants to learn your name before you say it. If you have ever heard yourself from 5 seconds ahead, you know why I keep one finger on the radio and the other on nothing in particular. I keep the window closed. I keep the wipers dry and ready. I keep words to myself. Sometimes late, in a chain hotel with 2 pictures bolted to a wall to keep you company, I dream of powder falling from the AC, then like the hotel has a fireplace hidden in the hallway. The powder makes a shape of boots and then forgets the shape. I wake to the taste of soot, and I brush my teeth, and it does not help. The mirror fogs from a shower, and I see a man lift his hand to weigh me down like we're doing each other a small favor. I lift my hand because it is a dream. When I lower it, the hand behind the fog does not lower as fast. I tell myself it is just a delay of glass. I tell myself a lot. I keep the dock times. I say yes to routes nobody wants. I tell dispatch I am cured of shortcuts and mean it most days. If the interstate closes and the GPS draws me toward Ashmouth Road, I add an hour and take the long way, and the map gets huffy and adjusts like a child denied. I accept probation and roll through. You could call it superstition. You could call it memory. You could call it self-respect. If you take anything from me, take this: roads remember. Some chew, some hum, some practice your voice until it fits inside theirs. When ash falls on a wet night and your reflection waits 3 curves ahead with your smile and your windbreaker and the slump your shoulders get when you are about to lie, do not give the courtesy of your name. Keep moving and let it wave to someone else. Or stop and hand a charm and see if the engine believes you deserve one more try. Either way, if you ever see a soot handprint appear on your wheel that isn't yours, Keep both hands open for a while and let it fade. The road will ask again later, in a different county, with a different excuse, with the same patient grin. It has time. It has a tally it wants to finish. Tonight I have miles. Tonight, I keep my window closed, my voice to myself, and when the ash in the vent drifts, I pretend it is dust and hum a song I do not remember learning. If you made it this far, breathe with me, slow and quiet, like we do when a house creaks and we pretend it is only to its settling. Tonight we heard a wind that learned a name, a hollow that used a heartbeat for sheet music, a lantern that tried to trade maps for mouths, a bell that assigns endings, and a road that practices your voice before you speak. Maybe they were only stories. Maybe they were the thin places talking back. But either way, check your windows before you turn off the lights, just in case something is waiting to be pronounced. Thank you for spending your night in the whispering abyss with me. If any detail stuck under your skin, tell me about it in the comments. Which story crept closest and why? Was it the two-note breath, the lantern's tilt, the rope that remembered hands, or the ash that spelled initials on the glass? Your theories are breadcrumbs, and I do read them, especially the ones that connect clues you think I did not see. If this kept you awake, a quick like helps the channel find other night walkers, and a subscribe with a bell on makes sure the next knock at 2:14 finds you. Share this with a friend who swears they do not scare easy. Watch what their face does when the kitchen goes quiet. I have a few things tucked away for our next gathering. A flea market radio that answers before you ask, a cold tipple staircase that counts footsteps and always comes up short, a motel room key that opens any door but only once. If you have a story from your neck of the mountains, send in a message, firsthand or close enough to taste. The Ridge loves a good rumor, and so do I. Before you go, listen to your room for one heartbeat. Do you hear a fan changing pitch? Do you smell cedar or iron or a match that has not been struck? If the answer is no, then sleep easy. If the answer is yes, leave a light on in the hall and tell yourself it is only the house learning to breathe the way houses do. Good night, traveler. Lock the door, silence the radio, and keep your name to yourself until morning. I will see you on the next road, and I will be the voice walking just behind you, whispering the warning you almost hear.